Greetings, Mark Grang here, publisher of the Conway Daily Sun. And today my guest is Cende Warmington, who's running for governor. Cende, how you doing?
Great, how are you?
Good. And Cende is a executive council from the 2nd District. And a lot of people, because you're in the 2nd District and we're in 1st District, where Joe Kenny represents us, really aren't familiar with you or your opponents. So maybe just take a couple minutes and introduce yourself.
Sure.
Sure.
So for the last 4 years, I've been the only Democrat on New Hampshire's Executive Council, standing up, fighting for reproductive health care, for affordable housing, for public education, for the environment, for so many issues. And now I am running for governor to make sure that every single Granite Stater gets their shot at the future.
And what about your, before we get to the issues, what about just your background?
Sure. So I have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. And before I came to the Executive Council, well, let me start with, when I was young, my dad worked in a shipyard. My mom waited tables to make ends meet. They had 4 kids in 5 years, and yet they were still able to buy a small house, put a roof over our heads.
And where was that?
That was in Massachusetts. Feed us, clothe us, give us a great education. I got to be the first person in my family to ever go to college, working my way through 30 hours a week. And I took my first job out of college at Lakes Region General Hospital in the laboratory as a medical technologist. And I spent 20 years in hospitals and healthcare. And then I went to law school and became a healthcare attorney. And I chaired the health law section at Shaheen and Gordon until I was elected to the Executive Council. And of course, now I've been on the Executive Council for 2 terms and fighting for all the issues that we were just talking about, and for every single Granite Stater to get their shot at the future.
And you're the only, there are 5 executive councilors. And we have a sort of peculiar way. I always say this because New Hampshire's a little peculiar, and it has an executive council,
Yes.
right? So what does the executive council do?
So we really are the eyes and ears of the people for the executive branch of government. So of course we review every single state contract over $10,000 and all of the nominations that the governor brings forward for the various positions, including judges, including all of the commissioners, and any kind of a board or commission anywhere around the state. But we are also a very important part of the job is constituent services. So anyone, anywhere in the state who's having a problem with state government can call up their executive counselor, and their executive counselor can help government get to work for the people of our state. And that is really what I have done on the Executive Council, really focusing in on the issues that I hear out and about in my district that constituents are concerned about. When I have an issue that's brought to me, I can then pick up the phone, call the commissioner, and I've been working with these commissioners now for years now. So I'm very familiar with how the process all works and how to put government to work for the people.
I think an outsider would say you're, as one of only one Democrat with 4 other Republicans that basically are outvoted all the time, but you're saying there's other constituent work to do too.
Yeah, and I will say that, of course, the votes when I'm in the minority of 1, the 4-1 votes get a lot of attention. But I will tell you, it's the 3-2 votes when I've been able to bring a couple of votes over to my side that I'm most proud of.
Like what?
And, well, for instance, on a recent vote on mental health in the schools, there was some opposition to that. And I had to get to work and start working with those other counselors to make sure they understood the value of the mental health services that we were providing in our schools, and we passed that with a 3-2 vote. Similarly, there was a contract for peer counseling services, and that looked like it really wasn't going to go through, and we needed at least 1 more vote, and I was able to bring over a vote. And and affordable housing is another great example where the governor had $100 million in housing money. It came to the council without a word about affordable in it. And I reached out to all the other counselors, said this isn't going to work in my district, it's not going to work in your district either. And they agreed, and I led the charge, but we sent it back to the governor. We got guardrails around affordable housing into it, and now we're building thousands of those units around the state right now. So for me, it's really learning to be effective and learning to lead on the council from a minority of one. Right, and that has been just a very rewarding and valuable experience whenever I can help the people of our state. I'm happy to give another example.
Sure, go
I mean,
ahead.
I'm so pleased with this is that the state actually wasn't going to apply for the summer EBT money, and that's the money that goes to families whose kids qualify for free and reduced lunch. I heard in February they weren't going to apply. This was on a Monday, and I called the department and said, why aren't we going to apply? And they said, too many administrative hurdles. And I got to work to remove those hurdles. 3 days later, we submitted an application, and then talking to the governor's office about approving the funding, that funding got approved recently, and now 40,000 kids are getting money for summer, over the summer when they are not in school and not receiving those meals. So we're feeding kids in our state, and I'm really proud of that.
So what are your top issues that you're running on now? As governor, what would it be like job 1, job 2, job 3?
Every single decision that we make in the state should be made through the lens of our working families. What I see is, I described how my family was able to put a roof over our heads. Well, for too many Granite State families, that's just out of reach right now. The costs of housing and childcare and energy and food are so high that our young people are finding it hard to stay here in the state and raise their families. And our seniors or those on fixed incomes can't make ends meet. So we're going to make decisions through the lens of the working family. Reproductive freedom, everyone has seen me on the Executive Council going toe-to-toe with the governor on his abortion ban, on the defunding of Planned Parenthood. We absolutely are going to protect reproductive freedom in this state. And our public education system is under assault. We have a commissioner of education right now that does not believe in public education and is dismantling our public education system, diverting taxpayer dollars into private organizations. We need to get those taxpayer dollars back to work in our public schools.
So what, just to dig into details a little bit, on the general budget, and when the budget passed last session, it was like the quickest budget, and the Dems were happy, the Republicans are happy, and that's a signal that there's money everywhere. Right. If everybody gets a lot, if everybody's happy on both sides, that tells me there's just a lot of money. And the state has been fortunate, I guess, to get hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government, mostly the COVID situation. So it does seem as though we could have some budgetary restraints. And I'll phrase that as a question. Do you think there'll be more budgetary restraints in the next session?
I think this is going to be a very different budget session because, as you say, those federal dollars, those COVID dollars are really coming to an end. All of them have to be obligated and then spent certainly by the end of our term, my term. And so these dollars aren't going to be here. And so I really need to be focusing in on building a budget the same way that Granite State families do, around their kitchen table, build up a budget from the ground up that reflects our priorities, already getting to work on that now because the budgeting process starts now for the next biennium. So we're already talking with state and Senate and House leadership about what that budget is going to look like in the next biennium. The important thing is that our budget is going to reflect the priorities of working families in our state. Working families need to be able to make ends meet. And on a two people working right now, I mean, I talked to a police officer. He's working full-time. His wife is an LNA. She's working full-time. And they've come to the conclusion that they will never be able to afford to buy a home. So something's gone terribly wrong when working families just can't make ends meet.
Is the answer, housing, we know housing, it's great if you own a house. It's not so great if you don't own a house, right? So you're talking about more subsidies for housing, or some people would say, let's just let the market correct itself. I mean, I think I just read like there's 1,000 new apartments being built in Dover. I mean, the market is reacting to it. I mean, how much should government be involved with that?
So government has a role in this, but here's the thing. This administration is leaving us 60,000 units behind. Kelly Ayotte wants to continue what this administration has done, and that has left us 60,000 units behind. We need a new direction. As I said, on the Executive Council, I advocated for the federal dollars that we have to go to affordable housing. We need to make sure we are capturing every federal dollar we can to bring it into the state to invest in affordable housing. But you're right. Government is not going to solve this problem alone. We need private industry, private developers to be building in our state. And as I travel around the state, I've met with private developers to say, why aren't you building? And the answer is almost unanimously zoning requirements. If they have, say, a piece of land that could accommodate 200 units, by the time they're finished with the zoning requirements, they're at 93.
Okay, so
it's not viable.
I'm going to interrupt you by saying that now a lot of those zoning requirements are local based, right? So how does the state? Are you saying the state should intercede with local zoning, like town zoning?
I believe in local control, but I do believe we can give incentives to communities to change their zoning ordinances to accommodate the density of housing that we need in the state. And I personally think our economic development money should be following those communities that want to accommodate the density of housing that we need. And that can come in a number of ways, because this problem isn't the same in Manchester as it is in the North Country, right? So there are a number of ways that we can help communities. We can help with building out the infrastructure of water and sewer in communities that don't have that, so that they could accommodate that additional density of housing. We can take some surplus land, as we've recently done here. I think it's on our agenda for this week for some surplus land to come back to Conway to accommodate some additional affordable housing.
A narrow bypass, I think. Yeah,
yep,
sure.
Some additional affordable housing right
Sure.
here in the community. And we can make sure that we're encouraging the availability of accessory dwelling units. A lot of our folks that might ordinarily be downsizing right now because their children have moved out and they might need a smaller place, there's no place for them to go. And so they may want to create an accessory dwelling unit in their home, additional income. We need to make sure that we're making that as easy as possible. The most important thing we could probably do around housing right now is change the narrative around housing, where people recognize that this isn't a not in my backyard situation. The people that we're keeping out of our backyards are our kids and
Sure.
our grandkids and our teachers and our firefighters and our police officers. And the communities that build the housing first win. Those are the communities that attract businesses, attract a higher tax base. That's how we build a vibrant economy for the future.
Okay, speaking of kids, and you mentioned Frank Edelblut and the commissioner, who you'd probably replace on day 2, if not day 1, right? I'm guessing. But this whole education freedom account situation, and the state spends about $1 billion in public education. And when the EFAs came about, it's really about school choice. And I think a lot of people agree with school choice in principle, but then what started off as the projected, whatever, $80,000 has now ballooned to $30 million in the budget, and we keep increasing, the state increases the requirements or the standards by which people can receive it, meaning their higher income people now can receive it. So is there, I guess where I'm going with all that, do you believe in school choice at all? And is there a point that the state should be involved? In other words, was the EFA program good when it first started, but now it's out of control?
Okay, so I believe that parents absolutely have the right to make the decision where they want to send their children to school, but I absolutely do not believe that they can take taxpayer dollars away from taxpayers and divert those into private organizations. So taxpayer dollars belong in our public schools. Fundamentally, the voucher program that Frank Edelblut has put forth is bad for public education. What it actually actually does ultimately is it takes more and more dollars away from public schools. That ends up driving up property taxes to the point that communities say they can't even afford it anymore, and then all you're left with is vouchers. To be clear, public education is the bedrock of our democracy, and we need to make sure that we protect it for the next generation. You know, I myself, I got a great public education. I got to go to college. I got to build a better life for myself and my kids, and I'm going to make sure we're protecting that for every single Granite State
And so
kid.
people understand it. I mean, the state now gives about $4,000 per kid to communities for each child. And the EFA program gives an additional $5,000. So I think that's the idea, is that, you know, for if you have a child's school choice, the state is paying $9,000 for that child as opposed to just $4,000 through the regular process that happens where the state gives money to communities. Is that right?
Well, I don't know if those are exactly the right numbers, but the program does have, there is additional funding in the program for these vouchers, and these vouchers are taking taxpayer dollars and really just subsidizing private school. The vast number of families that are receiving these vouchers never sent their kids to public school. They were families that had already decided their children were going to go to private school, and now all we're doing is subsidizing their decision to send their kids to private school. That is wrong. Those taxpayer dollars belong in our public schools. This is a program that Frank Edelblut has been selling to the state, and you were correct, the original estimate was about $130,000, and now next year we're looking, as I've heard, upwards of $60 million coming out of our public schools. We need to make sure we are protecting that, and yes, I will nominate a new Commissioner of Education on day one.
Yeah, I figured that. Now, what about cannabis? Now,
Yes.
last year, just to kind of summarize, the House, it was really complicated, but the House passed it and the Senate kind of passed it, and then the House didn't do enough to change the Senate, and then Sununu at the very end said, okay, now I support it if it went through the Liquor Commission, basically, which people, in fact, Nathaniel's sitting over there watching this as an advocate for this and correctly pointed out that if any state employees are involved, they're subject to being arrested, frankly, because it's not recognized at a federal level. So I guess the short question is what's your stand on cannabis, and if a bill came to you, would you sign it?
I have long been on the record for the legalization of cannabis, properly regulated and taxed, and yes, I believe we need to legalize cannabis. I think it is outrageous, honestly, that our residents are having to travel out of state to our surrounding states, where it's legal in all states, and that tax revenue is going to our surrounding states. Our residents have made it clear what their wishes are, that they wish to have access to this product, and we should have it available in our state and properly regulated and taxed.
Now, do you think, now the two basic plans were, one is more like a free market plan that the House approved, and Sununu's plan was really 15 locations. Which would you support?
I think that we're going to have to hear more testimony on that, and I think there may be something in between those two options that is where we might find that the majority end up. I don't think that 15 is anywhere near enough locations in our state, and I know that there's some opposition to free market, so I'm very open to hear the details.
Okay. Now, you know, there really are two New Hampshires. There's Concord South, and then there's the rest of us up here, you know, and it kind of is true. And so some of our concerns, one that I know you're very aware of is, and it's not quite local here, but is on the other side of the notch, is the landfill in Dalton. And there's controversy about that because Waste Management, I think, is the company that wants to build it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, a big landfill in Dalton, which is outside of Bethlehem. What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, I am opposed to location of that landfill. And I also have lifted up the issue of out-of-state trash in our state and have been leading on this issue, making sure people recognize that half the trash that is in our landfills is coming from out of state. Massachusetts and Connecticut have made it nearly impossible to site landfills in their states. So their trash has to go somewhere. Maine and Vermont have said, no thank you. New Hampshire's become the dumping ground for all of New England. And the leachate that comes off of a landfill, the drippings, get pumped off that landfill, put into tanker trucks every day, driven down the highway, and dumped into our wastewater treatment facilities, where it gets diluted and ends up back in our rivers and streams. So it is contaminating all of our drinking water with PFAS. We absolutely need to stop this dumping of out-of-state trash in our state. Right now, we have no need for any additional landfill capacity. The estimate is at least until 2034. So I have called for a moratorium on landfills while we assess this issue. We know that the federal levels for PFAS are being evaluated right now. We need to be setting a standard for wastewater treatment facilities, how much PFAS they can be releasing. We need to make sure we're protecting the drinking water for the people of our state.
Now, I assume these landfills are located on private land, right? Obviously. So the state would basically say to a private landowner they could not locate a landfill on their property. Is that how it would work?
The state controls, obviously has regulations for the location of landfills, but in order to cut down on the out-of-state trash, we have to deal with the Commerce Clause limitations. And Maine and Vermont have already done that, and we have to go through the details here. But it is going to be a process, but we need to be transitioning to a situation where we are not the dumping ground for out-of-state trash.
All right, so I guess the slogan "Live Trash or Die" you don't want to sign off on that one. Now, one of the initiatives that was proposed by, I think it was local rep Steve Woodcock and David Page, was to have to allow towns and communities to enact a $2 hotel fee per night. And that would allow, in communities like us, where we have an outsized fire department, outsized police department, because we have a big tourist population, that money would go exclusively to those services. And it passed the House, and somewhere along the line, it was defeated. It must have been in the Senate. And Sununu had said that he didn't like it. It never got to his desk, but he indicated that he didn't like it. Do you have a sense of about that?
So I have to say that we have about 1,000 bills in the House and the Senate. I don't follow every single one of them, but in general, I believe in local control, but we need to make sure that we're not increasing tax burdens on our citizens. So I would like to hear the testimony on that, and if it's a bill that has a lot of public support, I suspect it will be brought back up, and I will be happy to take a look at it as governor and see what's best for the whole state.
Can I lobby you now then for it? Because
Absolutely.
I think the conservatives said, oh, it's just another tax. And the people who sponsored it, the Democrats said, and locals, it wasn't just Democrats, I should say that. Our selectmen testified for it, and they're, at least a couple of them are conservative. And it's really not I guess you define it as a tax, but basically it's asking someone who pays $150 for a hotel room to kick in another $2 a night to help pay for the police that's going to come and help them when they get stuck in the river or get into an accident. So.
Yeah. Well, you may know that I am certainly against any sort of broad-based tax, no sales or income tax. I would veto those if they were to come to my desk. This is a very local issue, and I guess I would like to hear what people have to say about that, but I am not looking to increase the tax burden on working families. Again, every decision we make needs to be made through the lens of the working family.
I appreciate that. And I'll just say one more thing about the $2. It's not just Conway. It's for other communities, tourist-related communities. So we can count on your vote for that. Thank you very much. You are on the record now.
I cannot say that.
Just kidding. All right, so we have 5 minutes left. How's the campaign going? And how do you, Joyce Craig is your primary opponent. And
Sure.
She's the mayor of Manchester. So we're actually you're headed. This is Monday, and tonight in a couple hours you're going to be at a debate across the street. Actually, how are you going to differentiate yourself with Joyce?
I really, as the highest ranking Democrat in state government and the only Democrat on the Executive Council, I know the issues of our state. I know the issues north and south, east and west. I've represented rural communities, urban communities, not just one part of the state, but I know the issues of fishermen and firefighters, small businesses, large businesses, all across the state. I know how things work in the state house. I've shown that from a minority of one, I can get things done in our state. I've shown the ability ability to reach across that table and work in a bipartisan way. And that's really how you get things done in a purple state. And maybe most of all, who can win the race is what really matters. And you know, I am, for the last 4 years, have been the only person in the state of New Hampshire who ever goes toe-to-toe with Governor Sununu, and it happens every single council meeting. And I think going toe-to-toe with Governor Sununu is pretty good practice for going toe-to-toe with Kelly Ayotte on the debate stage. When asked about this race, the governor himself said, Warmington would be formidable, and he's right. And I think we have built a campaign with the most elected officials backing me, the state employees, firefighters, nurses, doctors supporting this campaign. We are ready to take on Kelly Ayotte in the fall and looking forward to getting through the primary. Well,
good. I'm sure that's well said, and I'm sure Kelly would appreciate your endorsement, because you've already got her through the primary. And but anyway, Cinde, it's been a pleasure to meet you, and good luck tonight.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.